Grab your sunscreen because we're headed to the beach. Yes, the devs over at Planetside 2 have been hard at work over the holiday period and have made substantial progress on the new continent of Oshur that we saw a brief look at on stream last year. They organised a couple playtests of this initial build with more to come with updates later. So we shouldn't think of this as a ready-to-go continent and new content, just something that's in a state where players can start to get a look and feel of how things are turning out. First impressions are very Far Cry, and in a good way, so no crocodiles so far, but the lush feeling of a tropical archipelago is here in spades and buckets, so I'm once again asking for swimwear cosmetics in the store as soon as possible. And as you can see, it's extremely pretty, showing once again that even in 2022, Planetside 2 can put on some fancy digs and scrub up rather well. Yes, this footage is all recorded at max settings. And even though this is the first playtest, I have to say that these playtests, especially the first ones, are a little weird. On the surface, they allow people to see what it's like to play in this new continent, but in actuality, it's a bit like a theme park where everyone's wandering around looking at the sights. You might shoot an enemy player that you spot, or maybe you'll spot some cool vista and just walk past each other. I'd imagine later playtests will feel more live when people are less kind of touristy. That being said, there's a lot to learn about this new continent of Oshur, not least the lack of warp gates at the extremities of the map takes some getting used to. Instead we have these flotillas of ships docked together that serve as spawn points and places to deploy vehicles. It felt different but familiar. It really did add a sense of nautical flavour to the experience of playing here. I liked how this all felt new to Planetside 2, not something that I could say about every time we've had a new continent added. And just a quick aside to say, if you are enjoying this, please do tap the thumb up button. It helps me out with YouTube and discoverability and all things like that. And if you tap that subscribe button as well, that's really appreciated too. Thank you very much. The water, which obviously acts as a natural barrier between the islands, works really well. It almost feels like it's been in the game for a while. There are a few rough edges with some interactions with some vehicles. There's clearly work still to be done here. Vehicles missing like the spray wake as they move around and so on. I was slightly surprised with how traversable the water felt with how I imagined it might play out. Something like a harasser, I moved fast enough across the surface for it to be a viable choice, obviously so long as you weren't actively engaged by enemies at the same time. Longer across open lake-sized areas did feel a bit more worrying to be in a vehicle though. Being on a large, flat, open area with almost no cover certainly makes you aware of quite how many sightlines there are potentially looking at your position. Again, this is all obviously skewed by the slightly less lethal than normal environment of this first test, but it made me feel hopeful that flotillas of vehicles might be seen making their way around, as it felt like a reasonably viable choice over just using the bridges. For infantry, well, yeah, less so. The distances and the less buoyant nature of infantry meant that if you were on foot, then you didn't really want to get your boots wet at all. I would say though that I kind of imagined more details to the underwater areas like we saw in that dev video, with rocks and plants and so on, and it may be that specific design that we saw was only used in some areas, just that in comparison to other underwater areas, they can feel quite empty by comparison. I can imagine it to be due to performance impacts of that many objects, and indeed, open flat underwater areas are pretty realistic, just that the experience of plunging into the underwater environment could vary quite a lot. I did like the submerged relics though. That biolab structure protruding from the ocean floor really helped convey a depth and scale that would otherwise be just an open area. It was great to see even while just flying over. There's clearly a lot of work gone into Oshur since we last saw it. The sheer density of objects from trees to bases to Sunday huts must have taken a significant amount of time and effort, and the world felt much more alive and Planetside 2-like than we saw in that video of that dev stream. It does genuinely feel like a new environment for Planetside 2. Not just the new models used, but also the bases too. They didn't feel like a copy-paste exercise from previous locations. Lessons from past map creation seem to make themselves present as well. Perhaps no more dramatic, a new feeling was that giant spire base that, although clearly still a work in progress, have certainly not been in the game before. I did slightly get a deja vu biolab feeling from landing on those side paths though, but do not panic, the interiors felt much different. Even in this block-out no-art phase, it was more open air to the outside, and as a light assault you could rotate around with relative ease, so I'll be interested to see how these bases feel to fight in, considering that you can only attack them from the air. This being a test, the performance was clearly not optimized like we experienced on the live game, and as such it felt lower than normal. That could be due to the density of the new objects, or maybe there are optimizations that just haven't happened yet. Kind of nodding in that direction was the chatter and yell that you needed to have your quality settings raised to see some of the buildings at all. To the outsider, just guessing, does sound like lower quality meshes and levels of detail models might not be in this test build yet, and hence the bugs and variable performance that we experienced. Again, this is all expected in pre-release content. It's nice to see there were no game-breaking performance problems either. On the bug side, I mentioned the transparent buildings that some people were seeing with lower quality settings. For me, the main issue was the sound dropout bug that I've experienced a handful of times in Planetside 2 over the years. The bug is when you no longer get weapon audio or VFX audio, it's only the background that's audible. At a guess, I'd wonder if the transition between having the camera in the air and then submerged, where there's a change in the audio mixing, might not be working as intended. I don't know if there's a command to reset the sound, but I think there might be, as I recall there being a stuck sound issue with Planetside 2 when it launched that we could clear in game, but the only other way I could find to fix it was to in fact restart the game. A good first round of tests on Oshur, I would say. I hope the devs got some good data and constructive feedback on what people liked and didn't. Personally, I found it to be really quite refreshing and in a decent spot for an initial test. And kudos to the Planetside 2 community as well, all you people out there. The devs reported that we managed to get over 1,000 players into that first test, and that's awesome to see. It's clear how much work has gone into Oshur, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it improves and gets polished as we get closer to launch. I intend to jump into future playtests on the PTS too. So what do you think of Oshur? Does it look like your kind of thing? Let me know all your powerful thoughts and feelings by leaving a comment below right now. Like always, I read every single one of them. Yes, even yours. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, please tap that thumb up and consider subscribing. It really helps me out. Thanks again, and I'll see you around next time. Take care.